Hello and welcome to today's webinar. On behalf of European Pharmaceutical Review and Altasciences, I'd like to thank you all for attending. I'm your moderator, Hannah Balfour, Assistant Editor of European Pharmaceutical Review. Today's speakers will be Dr. Beatrice Setnik, Chief Scientific Officer at Altasciences, and Paul Sidney, Senior Director, Compliance and Regulatory Affairs at Altasciences. Following their presentation, we will move on to a live question and answer session where you can pose questions to today's speakers. Please remember you can submit questions at any point during the webinar using the questions panel situated in the menu on the right. So, without hesitation, I'll pass you over to today's keynote speakers, Dr. Beatrice Setnik and Paul Sidney.
Thank you. Hello and welcome. Our session today will compare and contrast the clinical trial application process for the EMA, Health Canada, and FDA. We will cover the data requirements and the common elements to begin first-in-human trials. We will also cover the acceptance of foreign data to support drug submissions. Both the pre-submission and submission processes will be compared and contrasted. We will conclude the session with a question and answer period. The typical drug development process consists of various phases with key regulatory milestones throughout. Today's focus will be on the important transition from the preclinical phase to phase 1 clinical work. In this transition, the CTAs, or clinical trial applications, or IND, investigational new drug applications, are compiled and submitted for regulatory review prior to the commencement of human clinical trials. There are many commonalities in terms of the preclinical data required to support either the CTA or IND application. Preclinical programs encompass critical safety data that accounts for the type of drug, the target indication, as well as the intended treatment duration. In all cases, the protection of human participants is essential, and adequate safety data from preclinical studies must include characterization of toxicity. Such data is integral to determine the maximum safe starting doses in the first-in-human study, as well as providing guidance for dose escalation and clinical monitoring requirements. There are several helpful resources available to guide this process. Regulatory guidances are available specific for each regulatory body. In addition, the International Council for Harmonization offers comprehensive and standardized overviews of the technical requirements for pharmaceuticals intended for human use. Since its inception in 1990 to standardize drug development requirements between Europe, Japan, Canada, and the US, ICH has gradually evolved to respond to the increasingly global face of drug development. Regulatory guidances for the EMA, Health Canada, and FDA closely follow ICH guidelines, and therefore many common requirements are found between these agencies. ICH provides a comprehensive technical requirements for various aspects of pharmaceutical development. These cover preclinical and clinical drug development with specific guidances for various drug types, including small molecule, biologics, and oncology drugs, as well as specific topics related to safety, covering items such as carcinogenicity, genotoxicity, and other safety assessments. CTAs and INDs require similar preclinical studies to support the initiation of first-in-human studies. Many of these studies are required prior to the start of phase 1 clinical trials, and some can be conducted during the clinical phase of drug development. Requirements and timing may differ depending on the type of drug, for example, small molecules versus biologics. There are many important considerations to review prior to submitting a CTA or IND, and it is important to remember that each preclinical program is unique and may require adaptations. Preclinical safety should account for the indication, route of administration, and target populations. Other important considerations also relate to the assay development, confirming appropriate target dose concentrations, measuring serum drug concentrations, and testing immunogenicity. CTAs and IND cover various aspects of chemistry and manufacturing to ensure that quality and compliance requirements of the test articles are met for human testing. Ensuring streamlined coordination between preclinical and clinical development is essential in ensuring success and avoiding data gaps and issues that may be flagged at the CTA and IND submission stages. There are many available resources to help guide this process, including the guidance documents mentioned, as well as the regulatory agencies themselves, regulatory experts, and consultants. My colleague Paul Sidney will now discuss the regulatory submission considerations for first-in-human clinical trials.
Thanks very much, Beatrice. That was a great lead into the section that I'll be referring to, which is fundamentally taking all that common data, which is the preclinical, the CMC or quality data, and arranging it and preparing it for submissions, whether for approval to start your first-in-human clinical trial. This could be in the FDA through an IND, EMA through clinical trial authorization, or Health Canada's clinical trial approval or authorization. That's the focus of the chat. My intent is to walk through the process in a chronological manner, as you noted in the agenda, where we'll first address the issue of submitting whichever agency. What's the possibility of submitting an international study for one agency to another? So I've picked FDA and EMA regulations to demonstrate that foreign data can be used within the filing, regardless of which agency you're eventually going to be submitting your clinical data. So the drug development process considers conducting clinical trials internationally, as I said, to support the submissions, and the FDA regulations do permit the use of foreign clinical trials in support of an IND or market applications. Specifically, Title 21 CFR Part 314106, FDA has published an excellent guidance detailing their acceptance of foreign trials. As a point of reference, many of the studies conducted at Altasciences Canadian site are in support of FDA, EMA, and other international receiving authorities. So we have firsthand experience that this, in fact, is certainly accepted and should be not an impediment when you're pursuing potentially one area or another, be it Canada, US, or one of the member states in the EMA. The key to the acceptance is the research institutions should comply with the ICH E6R2 GCP regulations, and by complying with the GCPs, the requirements of foreign clinical trials will meet the regulations as specified by the FDA 21 CFR 312.120. The points that should be considered is specified within the regulations, quite detailed in 7 specific items, as I've highlighted here in the slide. FDA states that if the foreign clinical trial complies with, as I said, the GCPs and meets the independent ethics committee, the trials will be accepted in an NDA filing. Similarly, if you conduct the work in EMA or Health Canada, much of what you're obliged to complete with respect to the receiving authorities, be it Canada or European Monitoring Authority, will easily comply with these 7 items. First of all, the investigator qualification is specified in CTA and verified by a research ethics committee, so you can see that that's certainly met. CTA requires that clinical trial site information is presented, certainly in Health Canada and in the Part 2 section of the EMA filing as per the clinical trial regulation. The third item, a protocol is reviewed by an institutional review committee, and clinical trial data is reported as per ICH guidance. Detailed summary of drug product and drug substance is reported in the CTA filings, both EMA and Health Canada. In the case of EMA, it would be the IMPD filing. The fifth item, effectiveness of the study, and that it is well controlled, is assured, as I said, through the compliance of the GCP regulations. The ICF information for the 6 item and the subject incentives is reviewed and approved by the research committees, research ethics committees, and GCP sponsor monitoring is a standard both in Canada and Europe. So you can see quite readily that if you conduct the work in Canada or in Europe, it would be accepted by the FDA. The same thing holds true in the EMA, as I noted. The clinical trial regulation implemented, initially promulgated in 2014 and in full implementation October 2020, does specify specifically that clinical trials, first of all, they should be registered ahead of time. That's one key element. And as I've said, within the FDA, good clinical practice and the international ethics requirements should be complied with. One point I would like to comment on this slide is just the important milestone of the introduction of the clinical trial regulations. This is a significant change in the drug development process in the EU, and it has ensured data transparency in a more streamlined way. It allows for application process to be discussed interactively between member states. There's a single portal for data submission. The EU database set up for all trials facilitates communication, and it has set regulated review timelines. So this is quite a dramatic change and has streamlined the overall process in the EMA. We'll discuss that a bit more going forward. Now, as far as the chronological approach to submission process, there is in each of the receiving authorities the opportunity to discuss the aspects of your data that you've acquired, the preclinical data, the chemistry data that you've developed of your drug substance and drug product, and confirm that your drug development plan will comply and meet with the expectations of the receiving officers, regardless of agency that you're filing with. So to start, I'll review the Health Canada Pre-CTA submission process and the content that would be required. One comment that in the case of this COVID-19 pandemic age that we live in, there are very few face-to-face meetings, but receiving authorities still host these meetings either virtually or by written document. So it's still very much something that if you feel is important for your filing, something worth pursuing. In the case of Health Canada, requests should be submitted in the form of a cover letter, a brief synopsis of the proposed study, a list of questions to be addressed by the directorate during the meeting, identification of specific areas that you would be interested. For instance, if you want to focus on the quality section of your filing, you would focus your questions on that. You should propose 4 dates and times suitable for a pre-CTA consultation, and prepare and submit a pre-CTA information package 30 days before the agreed on date. One good thing about the information package, much like what we've talked about earlier on, there is a commonality across the various agencies. So if you develop an information package and then subsequently wish to do a similar exercise of a pre-filing meeting, you can harvest the information that you've developed for that information package and use it for the other receiving authority. Sponsors should prepare and send Health Canada a written record of the discussions and conclusions of the consultation meeting within 14 days of the consultation date. The information package should include, or in fact must include, proposed agenda, any prepared preliminary slides, and a complete list of attendees. Brief summary of all data, including tabular listing of completed preclinical studies an outline of the observed tox manifestations and discussions of their impact on the use of the drug in humans, an outline of the observed adverse events and discussion of potential safety problems. Proposed global clinical plan for the current stage of drug development, including regulatory status in other countries, is an important element for any receiving authority. This allows the receiving officers to frame your plans and see how your first-in-human study will complement and support your subsequent phase 2 and phase 3 trials. Summary of significant and quality aspects of the drug should also be included in your investigation information package. In the case of pre-CTA EMA submissions, the process allows for quite an extensive scientific advice review, and you can also apply for a protocol-specific review. The IRIS application allows for an electronic filing of the information, and as with Health Canada, the expected documents to be submitted for review are similar: briefing documents, introduce proposed development program, as you could see the recurring theme there, prepare a list of questions to obtain scientific advice. Regulatory questions should be written within scope of this meeting and establish contact with the agency and staff involved in your application review. As I've noted earlier, the focus highlights aspects of any issues that you may want to explore with the receiving officers or the experts on your quality, your chemistry, manufacturing, biological testing of the medicine, non-clinical aspects, both toxicological, pharmacological, and mechanism of action, clinical aspects, specifically what you're planning, and both addressing healthy volunteers and the endpoints of your planned studies, and to factor in risk management plans. Methodological issues such as stat plans, data analysis, and so on also can be discussed. EMA also provides feedback, as I said, to specific protocols, and the EMA sometimes committees may be using external experts to ensure complete assessment of your advice request. There is a fee associated with this oversight. As with most things in the FDA, the Pre-IND is driven by guidance and regulations. These meetings are formal meetings classed as a Type B meeting. The FDA must grant a meeting or feedback the sponsor's request within 60 days. There's an excellent guidance published by the FDA detailing the expectations, conduct of these meetings for reference. These meetings may assist the sponsor in designing their IND application based on FDA advice. For instance, if they may indicate expedited filing, expedited IND, or a fast track IND, depending on your therapy and the indication that your intended therapy will be helping. Small molecule therapy should be reviewed by CDER. Specifically within the center, they may have divisions that will look at quality, so the pharmaceutical quality section, the new drug section, or compliance may also participate in this meeting. The information package, as you can see the recurring theme here, should be submitted within 4 weeks prior to the date of the meeting. The FDA focuses heavily on CMC, and CMC is the section that through review of these filings can most frequently cause clinical holds on an IND submission. So it's something to focus heavily and ensure that you have all your questions responded when you're discussing your filings with the FDA. FDA provides feedback from a multidisciplinary review team discussing synthesis, dose form, formulation stability, dose frequency, etc. Questions included in a pre-IND information package should focus on the planned clinical trials, obviously the safety and possible clinical hold issues that may come up as a result of any issues with preclinical. And as you can see, there's quite a list of questions that would be or should be considered for the CMC or quality section. Pre-IND may avoid unnecessary studies. They ensure study design meets the FDA expectations. Gaining FDA support for a proposed strategy is also a key element, as would be the case for EMA and Health Canada. So that's really a value added when you have these pre-submission meetings. Obtaining regulatory insight also, current regulatory insight is invaluable. It can minimize your cost in the drug development process for not conducting studies that perhaps are not necessary or issues that should not necessarily be included at a certain time in the development, and clearly defining endpoints and goals of the program. So the next stage is, of course, filing the submission to obtain the right to conduct your clinical trial. Health Canada CTA submission is something that Altasciences is very familiar, so I've opened up with that. I'll be using Health Canada as a primary example with respect to EMA and FDA to minimize a repeat of some of the common elements of a filing and merely focus on the prime differences between what I'll be going through with Health Canada's submission versus FDA and EMA. Health Canada accepts eCTD or CTD format. There is no requirement to have hyperlinked documents provided for review. Sponsors must submit documents in electronic media, be it PDF or MS Word, not paper. We've noticed quite a much more fluent approach and ease with the agencies over the pandemic, and perhaps a benefit of the pandemic of correspondence through email, and in fact it's actually changed the filing process, some would consider in a much easier fashion, so that's a benefit. Health Canada does not require send files and preclinical study reports to be submitted as with the FDA. Toxicology reports is not required for CTA submission, i.e. the ICH Module 4 filings that FDA would expect. Language can be either English or French. For the filing, CTA must be submitted to the appropriate directorate. Health Canada CTA review process allocates clinical and quality sections to be assessed by separate offices, and it's done concurrently. CTA reviewer quality and clinical may issue information requests during the time frame that's been allotted for the review, and if you receive an information request, you must respond within 2 working days of receipt. Following the Health Canada review time, 30 days, if all is accepted, a no objection letter is issued. An NOL, as we call it, is a key document to receive that allows you to start the trial and allows you to import the investigational product to commence your trial. A sponsor may choose to withdraw a CTA submission. This can be done without prejudice. This may be done to allow time to address more fully information requests should there be more complex questions that have been posed by the receiving officer. By withdrawing without prejudice, you can develop your program, perhaps update your investigational brochure if that's required, or modify your protocol, and then refile to start the review once again in a 30-day timeline. Updates to a clinical trial made through a CTA amendment or notification, depending on how the change affects the safety or design of the trial. and is typically submitted post-NOL as a CTA notification. Clinical study reports does not have to be submitted to Health Canada. Health Canada does not require annual reports as is required by the FDA. Health Canada's submission process, as you can see the recurring theme here, ICH is a default, not only for Health Canada, but for EMA and for that matter, FDA as well. So that guidance is absolutely pivotal when you're planning your submission. Review the ICH M series, Q series, S series, and efficacy series of the guidance. If you have the documents already to support your IND, the CTA process will be straightforward, or for that matter, the EMA. The ICHM series guidance requirement is expected for both IND and CTA submissions. As you may note, the preclinical talk section is limited to the summaries embedded in the investigational brochure, which would be filed within the Module 1. The quality overall summary may be very simple, in particular if the submitting client has prepared an IMPD or filed an IND prior to the Health Canada submission. Health Canada would accept this document with very little administrative additions. In the Module 1, as I'm sure those that have filed before, this is common to most submissions as it follows the ICH to the letter. And if you have filed already at FDA or EMA, the process of converting your information to a Health Canada submission format is a very simple process. It's something that Altasciences does for many of our clients to facilitate their filing in Health Canada. Similarly, the investigator brochure, which is a key deliverable, provides a summary of key elements that would be expected. And as I'd mentioned, there's no obligation to provide the definitive reports or data, although it may be requested on occasion. And as you see, the last Module 2 details the quality section of the filing, your drug substance and drug product. This employs a very straightforward QOS template, as we call it, quality overall summary. There's an excellent guidance published in the Health Canada website that details the QOS. I'll use our vernacular, quality overall summary. And it is a very straightforward process detailing the specific requirements. Some of the detailed information that is requested in that template is supported by certificates of analyses. The analytical data that you would be reporting in this QOS must be conducted in compliance with CGPM GMP regulations. I've shown this module on this slide primarily because that's the key diagram that's seen by all for ICHM filings. And as I've discussed, within Health Canada, it's Module 1, Module 2, and on occasion Module 3. And in the case of FDA, it includes all 5 modules. The rationale and the reason for that primarily is because the FDA, you're filing not per clinical trial, but as a clinical trial for clinical trial program approval with subsequent updates over the course of your phase 1, 2, and 3 filing. So as opposed to EMA and Health Canada, that is more of an iterative filing where you file a CTA request for each clinical trial that you're planning. In the FDA, you file your IND and then amend and update as the program continues. As I mentioned, I'm just going to be highlighting differences between the filings of Health Canada. IND application is submitted to gain approval through the Title 21 CFR Part 312, 22, and 23. The Module 1 content is similar to Health Canada. As I said, there's administrative differences, but you can harvest that information quite easily. Module 2 and 3 has differences. Fundamentally, the differences between the FDA and Health Canada for CMC, the drug substance and drug product characterization, stability, purity data should be clinical grade, but does not strictly have to be CGMP. It can obviously should be characterized, and the purity and stability data developed in a GMP facility, but not claiming specifically CGMP. The quality overall summary guidance for first-in-human approved requires less supporting data, as I'd mentioned, for a study and not a program. Health Canada does not require analytical methods to be provided for a first-in-human clinical trial. Description of method of manufacturing, packaging, labeling, environmental assessment are not required in Health Canada, but is expected for FDA IND filings. As this submission for clinical program complete, preclinical and clinical reports should be submitted. In addition, the FDA requires standard electronic non-clinical data submissions to facilitate review or assessment of the non-clinical data. And the IND is a 30-day review process. During the course of the review, the FDA may request changes to the program and or clinical trial. The changes must be made to restart the review clock, which is termed a clinical hold, and can be a partial or complete clinical hold depending on the questions that have been received. This details the various regulations that are being met by filing the various preclinical and CMC data. In the case of EMA, clinical trial regulations instituted the use of a data portal for submission documents, and this can be in XML format. To ensure timely approval, the Parts 1 and Part 2 detailed in the EMA filing, and you can see the various documents that are detailed in Part 1. Scanning through these, you can see the similarity of what has been noted in the other slides with respect to FDA and Health Canada, with the inclusion of the protocol, investigation brochure, IMPD documents, and any scientific advice that you've received, be it EU or other agencies if you've used international filing. So Part 1 is primarily information on product and protocol. It's filed through the portal. Part 2 is primarily for the member state and deals with information specifically on the trial and where it is planned to be conducted. CMC data for batch release must have a qualified person declaration, which is something unique to the EMA. Drug labeling must be in the submission, which is not required by Health Canada, and there are evaluation fees for a filing. As you can see, I've highlighted differences once again with this EMA and Health Canada. Their IMP data is much more elaborate as far as the quality data and documents required, which includes batch release, batches used to date, drug substance manufacturing, process development, all of which in a first-in-human trial in Health Canada would not be required. I've included the guidance document, an excellent document, very detailed and valuable when you're preparing a submission. EMA provides excellent step-by-step guidance documents. This just quickly is a visual of the portal system that the clinical trial regulations has instituted to facilitate the review process. So now I'll just walk through the actual submission timelines and milestones. This diagram provides a very high-level view of the Health Canada CTA submission. Initially, submission is received by Health Canada. In our case, in this discussion, we're focusing on small molecules. So this would be forwarded to that specific office or bureau. A screening CTA submission usually is completed within 24 hours of submitting the CTA package to the Office of Clinical Trials. It could be longer. It had been a little bit longer during the pandemic. As you can imagine, the agency has been very busy with a number of filings for medications that have been developed internationally to prevent and treat COVID. However, we've seen an improvement on that, and it's now anywhere from 24 to 48-hour turnaround for a screening time. This is forwarded on to the Office of Clinical Trials, at which point an acknowledgement letter is issued and the 30-day review time begins. On occasion, there may be an information request received at the screening time frame, and you're given 2 days to respond to that, 2 working days to respond to that information request. Review is a parallel review process by both the clinical and the quality division overseeing your file, and you may receive information requests either from the clinical or the quality division during the course of that 30-day period of review. As with the screening section of the process, you're given 2 days to respond, and at which point, if all is accepted, a review is complete and a no objection letter is issued and the clinical trial can commence, as I've noted earlier. I've included this diagram. It's been replaced by the clinical trial regulation only to highlight that the legacy process has been updated through the clinical trial regulations, and the main impact of this old timeline, the initial assessment phase has been decreased from 30 to 60 days to 26-day time frame. The validation phase has been decreased to as short as 3 days, and deadline for the sponsor to provide additional information has been standardized and decreased to 12 days. If dates are not met, the CTA will be deemed to have lapsed, and you can subsequently refile. This diagram has been published in, I believe, the EMA, and as I've noted, CTA approval of clinical trials, if there are no issues, can be as short as 60 days, as noted in this particular diagram here, or bar graph. There is a 10-day validation process of the submitted data. If there are validation issues, it is resubmitted in a 10 days, and shorter time frame to validate 5 days is also used by the EMA. 45 days are allotted to the EMA for assessment, consolidation, and information review. All of this is detailed within this diagram, and you can see now that the timeline has been standardized, as I've said earlier, and is now as short as 60 days for CTA EMA, overall EMA filing. And as I wanted to highlight here, if you want to optimize the time frame to initiate your clinical trial, you can submit part 1 and 2 concurrently, and this obviously facilitates and shortens the CTA approval process. The new process impacts our harmonization within the EU, a single dossier and submission, single opinion per member state, which is obviously simpler for the submitting company. Facilitates multi-state clinical trials, which is obviously a great advantage within the EU. E-submission through the portal is an easy process. It enhances transparency and accelerates decisions. The FDA process, once again, is very much driven by regulation. The IND submission, review, and approval process for an FDA clinical trial program consists of, upon submitting the IND, the sponsor will receive a letter of acknowledgement. The letter will list the IND number and the project manager assigned. The review, a 30-day process, is overseen by multidisciplinary reviewers, addressing, as I've mentioned earlier in slides, the chemistry, the preclinical, and if you have clinical data, that would be reviewed, all by separate offices. Sponsor does not have to wait for an official document to start their trial, unlike Health Canada, where you must receive a no objection letter. If the 30-day time lapses, you can start your trial immediately. During the 30-day review, the FDA may contact the sponsor, first by phone, followed by a letter tabling concerns with the submission. This may result in a complete or partial clinical hold, as I've mentioned, if the responses are not satisfactorily addressed within the 30-day time frame. The clock would be on hold, and at which point, once the answers have been accepted by the FDA, the clock would restart. So in conclusion, this table is primarily a reference. I believe the attendees will be getting this slide deck if requested. It merely highlights some key differences. Principally, FDA, you're filing for a program and you're adding to your information set as you progress through your drug development efficacy phase. Whereas Health Canada and EMA, you must file a CTA per trial and update the IMPD and CTA filing for Health Canada per submission. The review times, I provide information on the CTA review period in non-pandemic times. There may be slight changes between agencies, but fundamentally it is as described in this table. In fact, there are laws that preclude a decrease in that time. So 30-day default, as I said, without any issues, 60-day time frame, and Health Canada 30-day default review time. The CTA content, as I've mentioned, fundamentally, one is dealing per trial, the other is by program, and that is fundamentally one of the driving differences. There is a more elaborate annual reporting process for the FDA, whereas in the other agencies, there would be a submission per trial. So hopefully that overview has provided a chronological step-by-step process. I admit it is quite high level, and more than willing to address any detailed questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Paul, thank you. This is Beatrice. I just wanted to I enjoyed your presentation, and I think one of the things that really stands out is the process with the CTA and the FDA, and regarding the if there are issues, the approaches that both agencies take with respect to either putting things on a clinical hold with an undefined time frame versus the ability within the Health Canada application to withdraw without prejudice. And I think that that's a striking difference. And oftentimes we've had sponsors that have approached us to run some of the clinical trials in Canada first before opening up a IND in the US, so that they're able to already submit clinical data as part of the IND package, and that we've seen that approach becoming a more frequent as a strategy. And I think part of that is also just circumventing the risks associated with being able to address these issues in a timeline where you're not without prejudice.
Yeah, exactly right, Beatrice. That's so true. I think that is a true feature of Health Canada. And in fact, the Health Canada does interact while we're filing submissions. We have our relationships with Health Canada to facilitate, although I've mentioned a 2-day time frame, they are respectful that these sometimes are international filings, and we will reach out to them for European colleagues or different time zones within the US to permit maybe a half day more, so it's not as rigorous as the fixed 2-day time frame. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Dr. Beatrice Setnik and Paul Sidney, for your excellent insights and presentations. We're now going to move on and introduce our question and answer session, where you will answer some of our audience questions. Don't forget, as the audience, you can still submit questions using the questions panel in the menu on the right. So let's take a look at the first question. Which countries permit simultaneous IRB approval during drug submission review by receiving authority?
Yeah, I'll field that. I suspect many of these may be submission oriented, but I'll jump into it. Health Canada and EMA, as you may have noted in my presentations, do permit simultaneous IRB review, and does allow that. You can submit protocols before IND confirmation to an IRB oversight, and as noted in the clinical program, you would be having protocols submitted over the course of your phase 1 through 3 development, and so the IRBs would be something that would be simultaneous as far as an IND filing as well.
Thank you, Paul. And must the stability of drug substances and drug product be provided prior to a CTA submission to Health Canada?
Yeah, that's a great question. Many of our clients have asked that as well. In fact, representative GMP batches are accepted to support the stability of the submission and application, but certainly the drug substance and drug product representative batches should be filed prior to the submission of the CTA. And I know that the CMC tends to be a key challenge in developing the filing and submission requirements, and so those points are really important so that you're not putting your submission in jeopardy.
And can a certificate of suitability or drug master file be referenced in a drug submission to CTA, in a CTA drug submission or IND drug submission?
Simply, yes, it can. I mean, specifically in Health Canada, I can speak to that, accepts cross references to a certificate of suitability, excuse me, and drug master file. The DMF, or the drug master file, must be previously submitted to Health Canada, and all requirements to the DMF must be met and kept current. So that's something that you do consider. I know that some developers have drug master files as part of their filings, and so that is certainly an issue to consider prior to a CTA filing.
Thank you, Paul. And here's another one from our audience. Would it be possible to submit an IMPD for the quality section of a Health Canada CTA?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well, and I hopefully I shared that in the presentation, that if you filed either FDA or EMA, and in the case IMPD reference EMA, this really does facilitate filing in other agencies, and specifically for Health Canada, they do accept an IMPD. In fact, the submission is very much simpler and direct. The template would still have to be used, the quality overall summary, but it would merely cross-reference the IMPD or EMA summary. So that hopefully highlights the work effort that you've put into the EMA filing will lighten the load in other submissions.
Thank you. And What are the labelling requirements for Health Canada approved clinical trial investigational products?
So labelings are not required for regulatory submission, nor the IRB. The containers should be clearly labeled when you're filing, importing or exporting to Health Canada, and should have both official languages and guidances on that. In the case of Altasciences, we recognize that can be a challenge, and so our pharmacy staff has SOPs that can facilitate that process, so that if you have a single language, usually English, we can manage the labeling process quite easily.
And while we're on import or export, would the import/export licensing process extend the approval process of a CTA?
The import and export process can be run in parallel to the CTA and IRB activities, so it would not extend. We just need to be notified or recognize the IP, and we certainly can, and most CROs can address that issue. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Paul. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. So any unanswered questions will be responded to via email after the session. Please join me in thanking Dr. Beatrice Setnik and Paul Sidney for their time today. As you leave the webinar, a survey will appear on your screen asking you to rate the webinar. Please take a moment to provide your feedback. If now is not a good time, the survey will be sent to you shortly via email. If you could complete it when you can, we would greatly appreciate it. On behalf of European Pharmaceutical Review and Altasciences, I'd like to thank you all for attending today's webinar. We hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.